email I get is from people asking me if their car is burning oil, why is it burning oil, is this bad, what does it mean, or do I need a head gasket? Someone told me I might. Why do I have moisture and coffee-colored stuff on my dipstick near the top, or in my dipstick tube, or in my oil cap of my engine? So I'm going to give you an explanation of how all that works so you can decide for yourself. And of course a random kitty pops in the video. Meow. Speak up. Well, anyways, every car has got an oil cap. The two coolest parts of your engine when it's running is the top of the oil cap and your top of your dipstick tube. So condensation forms on there. Well, where does the moisture come from? For every gallon of gas you burn, or pretty much any fuel, you get 7/10 of a gallon back as water vapor, as water, because it's made of hydrocarbons, hydrogen and carbon. The hydrogen is combined with oxygen to make water. Well, every engine has some blow-by. Blow-by is what goes out this PCV tube and gets reburned in the engine. Get out of the way, Kitty. Come on. Anyways, blow-by is actually just exhaust that got past the rings and got sort of gungied up and smellied with the oil that's in the engine. But it's still just exhaust, so it has water vapor in it. So the engine has to do something with it, or it blows out all your seals. So in the colder months of the year, the moisture goes to the top of the engine and condenses on the coolest parts of the engine, like the dipstick tube and the oil filler cap. That mixes with the oil that's on there and makes it coffee colored or creamy colored or whatever, and makes you think you have a bad head gasket, but you don't. Now if you have a bad head gasket, you pull your oil out and look at it, it's white or gray or coffee colored, well then, yeah, you have a cracked head or a bad head gasket. The best way to test for a bad head gasket is when the motor's cold. Like overnight, you start up in the morning. Here's what you do. Release your rad cap, take it completely off, then put it back on. Then start your engine up, put it in drive, put the brake on hard, and accelerate to 2,000 RPM with the brake on hard in drive for 30 seconds with a totally cold motor. Then shut her down. A good engine when it's cold will have no pressure in there. So be careful, be aware. It could spray you and get that stuff in your eyes, although it won't blind you. Now, a lot of other people ask me about the smoke that comes out of their tailpipe in the morning. It just puffs blue for about 30 seconds. Well, that's especially common in General Motors 8-cylinder cars of years gone by. Well, that's caused by valve seals or worn valve guides. And those GM engines have what's called a slinger-type oil seal. It's just an O-ring. It can be round or square. Well, it's always round in the middle, but I'm talking about the profile of it. It can be round or square. This isn't the right one for this valve. It grips the valve very well, and it sits about there on the valve. When the valve is bouncing quickly up and down, when the oil travels over that bump of the O-ring, it gets thrown off. But when the engine's running at a much slower RPM and the valve is moving much slower, more oil actually runs down the valve guide, and when the engine is shut off, the residual oil that was up here and on the retaining cap trickles down too, gets on the face of the valve. As soon as the motor starts, the oil is sucked in a little bit, and the stuff that runs down the exhaust valve is burned as the hot exhaust goes out, and that's why you get that puff of smoke, but your engine isn't actually consuming oil. On the other type of oil seal, which is more common on modern vehicles, is this one. It's got a metal cap. Doesn't always have to have that ridge. It's always got rubber or neoprene on the top and a little spring to grip it to give some tension on the valve. And this is pressed on to the top of the guide, which is sticking out of the head, and it stays there until you need to replace it. So there's what it looks like when it's installed. And of course the valve just slides up and down, and it grips the shaft, and it prevents the oil from running down the guide. Well, anyways, on 3-liter engines like in Mitsubishi's, it's a very common problem that the guide, which is like a little tube pressed into the head, seizes to the valve one day and can get sucked down with the valve, so the guide is not sticking out of the head, it's sitting lower than the surface of the head, forms a little pocket This thing just pops off then and is floating around, never gets in trouble, there's no place for it to go, but it acts like a little funnel. The oil fills in that little pocket where the guide is sunk in the head, runs down the valve, gets sucked into the motor and burned off, and sometimes oil runs down the exhaust valve and does the same thing. If hot gas is coming out, ignite it and give you smoke. And Mitsubishi's, they have a problem of consuming a lot of oil all the time when their valve seals pop off. Or the rubber neoprene up here gets too hard and it no longer grips the valve. Like, for example, if you took this valve seal off and let go, it would slide down the valve just by gravity. So I would say that's a very common problem with a lot of modern cars, especially Mitsubishi's of the 1980s. If you